日本史学習に最高にもってこいのサイトサムライアーカイブスポッドキャストへようこそ。美しい自然にあふれてる縄文時代から波乱万丈な幕末まで全時代を網羅して日本史の隅から隅まで一緒に語り合いましょう。では早速日本史の世界へ。
Hey everybody, this is Chris. Welcome back to the Samurai Archives podcast. Today we have an interesting topic, the history of travel and tourism in Japan. So we look at how people traveled around pre-modern Japan, where they went, and get into all sorts of other interesting tidbits and tangents. Today we have Dr. Travis Seifman and Marky Starr from the JapanThis blog. You might remember Marky from a couple past episodes. He's the resident expert on Japanese places and tourist sites, so he'll school you all in pre-modern travel. And be sure to check out patreon.com/samuraiarchives to see how you can help out the podcast. So go take a look. We have bonus audio, bonus content, updates, and all sorts of other stuff to help you get the most out of your interest in Japanese history. Okay, let's get started. All right, so we are here on the internet today to talk about tourism, the history of tourism in Japan. And with that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Marky, who is our resident expert, who will get everything kicked off and started. So tell us about travel in Japan.
Travel in Japan. So why am I even talking about travel in Japan? Number one, plug for the website, JapanThis.com. Check it out. But I've been working in tourism and sort of educating foreigners about Japanese culture for a few years now, and I just wanted to talk about. I thought we could start with a quick overview about the tourism industry and things that I think most people take for granted when they come to visit Japan or when they go to any country, actually, and that there are three types of tourism. There's inbound, outbound, and domestic. And I think we can touch on all of those topics today. And then recently, there are a lot of kind of interesting subgenres. So we've got dark tourism, culinary tourism, photo tourism, art and architecture, pop culture tourism, and that's things like anime pilgrimages, history, and currently, one of the hot topics here in Japan is sports tourism. So right now, the Rugby World Cup is going on. In 2020, we've got the Summer Olympics. There's the World Baseball Classic, which happens here. And once Japan had the Soccer World Cup that they shared with Korea. Mm-hmm. There are also some problems in Japanese tourism. So anyone who's been over here, like if you'd come here, let's say 5 years ago, Japan wasn't really a tourist destination. Like hardcore Japanophiles came to Japan, and a lot of weeaboos, if you know what that term means. But it's now Japan is like probably one of the top 3 tourist destinations in the world. It's like a hot spot. So if you come to Tokyo, which, depending how you slice up the pie, let's say 70 million people live here. You throw another 1 million, 2 million people into the mix, it's a huge metropolis and the infrastructure is there and can support it. But if you go to a city like Kyoto, which you could literally walk across in an hour, they don't have that infrastructure. And so they're suffering from over-tourism. In fact, the Japanese use the term kankou kogai, which means tourist pollution.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I was pretty lucky because I did 2 weeks in Kyoto back in 2007, and I walked up and down the city in pretty much every direction, and it really was not crowded. So maybe I got there before the rush.
Well, and I'm sure Travis and you can both speak to this experience. It's like Tokyo is a calm, like the image is it's a calm, quiet place where like even Japanese people will go to sort of reconnect with their spiritual Japaneseness or something. But during the peak seasons in autumn and spring, like you'll get on a bus and it's just all foreigners standing room only, talking loudly in all these crazy languages, and then you'll see like the one little old lady who just went to the supermarket to get some fresh fish and vegetables for dinner, and like cowering like in a corner.
Oh God. I've only seen. I think I've pretty much only ever seen Kyoto in the summer, like in the real peak heat of the summer, and so thankfully there aren't that many tourists, at that time. But it's, I don't know. But I mean, I think, and maybe you guys know better, but I think the local government is still promoting that, more and more tourism, so it's just terrible. I don't know.
Well, yeah, the local. You mean the local government in Kyoto?
The Kyoto, I don't know if it's the Kyoto city government, the national Japanese government, whoever.
Both are doing it, but I think like it's the governor or the mayor of the actual Kyoto city was quoted earlier this year, I think, complaining that Kyoto is not Disneyland. Like, there's a backlash.
Well, right. And then, I mean, I don't know if we're kind of jumping in at the front end, but maybe later on we could talk about how, I think I've heard about some efforts to like try to convince tourists to go other places, right? And like, I think that would be really good. I mean, in a certain sense, it's really good for, I don't know, Okazaki to get more tourists, but at the same time, you're just going to like Disneyfy everywhere by like pushing tourists to go everywhere.
Well, it's funny you brought that up, because that was literally my next topic, which is kind of what are some of the remedies to tourism pollution, and it's sort of offloading tourists to these other cool places in the countryside. So you said Okazaki or Hamamatsu, Kawagoe. They're all these great places out there, and they're hungry for tourist dollars.
Yeah.
The problem is, and because I don't think you're gonna offload so many people there, because people want to see the iconic things in the websites and the travel brochures and whatever. But the problem is their local bureaucracies are clueless as to how to promote themselves. So, for example, there's a town called Gyoda, which is on the border of Saitama Prefecture and Guma Prefecture. And they have one of the most important kofun clusters, so those old burial mounds. And I think that the oldest sword, not the oldest sword, but the sword with the oldest kanji inscription on it was excavated there.
Oh.
And they also have Oshijo, so Oshi Castle, which was flooded by, the moats were flooded by Toyotomi Hideyoshi in the Sengoku period. I think there's even a movie about it. So they call it like the floating castle.
Right.
So they're sitting on a gold mine, but what the local people but that town used to be famous for tabi production. So those Japanese socks with it's kind of like a mitten for your toes. Like there's one thing for your big toe, and then the rest goes over the other toes. And they promote the city as like, this is the tabi city. Like nobody's gonna go there to see socks.
I mean, I might, but
they don't even produce them there anymore. It's the crazy thing. And when I was at the tourism expo last year, I saw a guy from Gyoda, and I was like, oh, I know your city. And he was like, hey, there's a TV drama coming out about tabi featuring our city. And that was their main push. I was
woohoo.
Like, you've got this kofun cluster, you've got this castle, you've got good food, like why wouldn't you promote that? So offloading tourists to cool other places is kind of a difficult task. And then coming to my last kind of main topic that I wanted to bring up is that there are kind of 3 waves, maybe 4, depending how you chop it up, of tourism in Japan. It mainly begins after the Meiji coup. so 1868. And, during the Bakumatsu, the last years of the shogunate, we've got an influx of adventurers and dignitaries and business people coming into Japan to kind of cash in on the country opening up. So these kind of adventurers often wanted to see the rest of the country, obviously. They also wanted to get out of Edo or get out of Kyoto because it's unbearably hot in the summer with the humidity. It makes it like a sauna. It's disgusting. So they would use the old post road system and head on out, and they'd go to more comfortable climates. So places like Hakone, where they could see Mount Fuji and get beautiful sights and row boats across the lakes down there. Or they'd go to Karuizawa, which even today has a kind of Western flavor to it that's left over from those foreigners. Kamakura is another one, but I think that's mostly because Yokohama was an open port. And then we get another wave of tourism after World War II. So the post-war recovery, America's just pumping cash into Japan. And in the build-up to the 1964 Olympics, they began promoting sports tourism. Also, the U.S. military was creating a kind of domestic tourism. Because keep in mind, Japanese people just didn't travel for the most part. You had to have a lot of money to give up work and move around. So the U.S. military personnel kind of gave a fuel injection to that. And then the current wave, which is easily the biggest one, is occurring right now. And this has been for the past 5 years or so, where the Tokyo government and the Japanese national government has been just pushing for it because they realized with the declining birth rate and the aging population, they need foreign cash in a big way. And that's why we've got the Rugby World Cup happening right now and the 2020 Olympics and all these kind of events. So there's an unprecedented wave of inbound tourism going on right now. And then just a kind of footnote to those sort of three waves of tourism. I'd like to add, and Travis will definitely back me up on this one, is that you could kind of argue that there was a pre-modern tourism of sorts. I don't know if I'd use that word for it, but in that era we've got the pilgrimages, the Sankin Kotai, or the alternative attendance processions coming back and forth. And I would argue that these pilgrimages and things like Sankin Kotai sparked a curiosity in the people, especially in Edo. Like, who are all these people from these other domains coming in with their weird dialects and their slightly different costumes and all this sort of thing, and different foods. And that also generated maybe a boom or a trend among certain woodblock print artists, and Utagawa Hiroshige comes to mind, to get out there and get permission from the shogunate to travel, because he did need permission, and get these exotic locations in print, so anybody in Edo or anybody in Japan could have access to the places that they couldn't travel to. And that just sort of sparked imagination. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not 100% sure. Call it tourism. Don't call it tourism. Maybe there's some kind of specific definition or some kind of specific conversation to be had there about what constitutes tourism. But I mean, I think a lot of people have talked about how travel just exploded in the Edo period, right? And people were traveling, I think a lot of times, I think a lot of times people said they were going on pilgrimage in order to, get permission or
Absolutely.
whatever, in order to get these tegata, basically passports. But they said they were going on pilgrimage in order to get in order to get the permission, but really they were out there to see the meisho, to see the famous sites, and to try out the foods and whatever it was, and just to travel. As I think we talked about a tiny bit, we kind of hinted in that direction last night off the record, but Konstantin Vaporis, in his book Tour of Duty, he talks about how Sankin Kotai, all these people, these samurai moving back and forth, really helped create like a national culture, if we want to use that word national, but bringing culture, bringing things and people and ideas from all around the archipelago to Edo, and then bringing everybody's stuff from Edo back to the domains.
Back out.
So,
yeah.
Right. So, it's a huge, like, movement of people and things and like this. And, one thing I thought, one thing I think is interesting about it is I'm not positive, maybe you know better, I'm not positive about Hiroshige. I know Hokusai didn't really travel much. Hokusai produced these 36 views of Mount Fuji, and he produced a whole series of pictures of famous waterfalls, and he produced 8 views of Ryukyu, which he certainly never went to. But Hokusai, relied on other people's pictures, relied on books and maybe imagination.
I didn't know that. Interesting, because he's got that iconic Mount Fuji shot and like the wave over Kanagawa.
Yeah.
Presumably he could go to Kanagawa, but I don't know.
Well, could, but I don't know whether or not he did. I mean, Kanagawa's not that far.
No.
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that Hokusai did a lot of traveling. But anyway, so even he, but also his consumers, are kind of traveling vicariously through the pictures. They're traveling imaginatively. But a lot of people also traveled for real. And anyway, I mean, just to say that I think one of the really big changes, I don't know enough about medieval Japan, but in the Edo period, with Sengoku being over with, everything's a lot more peaceful, everything's a lot more stable, and
the infrastructure is in place as well.
Right. The whole Shukuba system, infrastructure is in place to be able to travel and to have a place to stay, at each town that you end up in, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And, when you mentioned, like, I don't know, I think you said, I don't know if we could call it tourism or not, if there's some other word, that sort of reminded me that in modern Japan, the word that you would say is kanko.
Right.
But you could also use, tabi.
Right.
Words like that. And I think maybe in the Edo period, maybe tabi would be better. But even today, if you say tsuarism or tsuaristo to Japanese, they know exactly what you mean. They've got that word as well. So, in Japanese, actually, it's interesting that on the language side of things, they've got a far more. What can I say? Far more. I guess it's a broad spectrum of ways to think about traveling, whereas in English we just say travel or tour, go on a tour or something like that.
Right. Well, I should let you go because I'm going to get off on a tangent.
Well, it's funny you say that because I'm going off on a tangent as well, because being kind of a word nerd, this is something I didn't know until recently, is that the word tourism is actually a fairly recent word, even in the English language, and that it dates back to the Enlightenment. So the first time we see the word tourist in print is 1772. The word tourism was first used in print in 1811.
Oh, that's relatively recent.
Yeah. So to put that into perspective, right, we get the Commodore Perry and the Black Ships in 1853. 1854, Perry comes back, and then what I have here on my notes. But yeah, at any rate, that's not far behind the West if you think about it in terms of Japanese modernization, or if we want to say this is the quote-unquote pre-modern period and the quote-unquote modern period.
Right.
Yeah, so they were sort of matching the West in terms of at least having this idea of tourism versus just going to some place either on a religious pilgrimage or merchants traveling to places because that's where they have their business opportunities and whatnot.
Yeah. And one thing that's always struck me about Edo period travel, Edo period tourism, is you read people's diaries or whatever, and people seem to be pretty explicit about their excitement to see famous sites, to taste foods, all this meibutsu kind of thing. Oh, if we'll go to this
Meibutsu, yeah.
go to this place, they have famous foods, and people, when they visit Nagasaki, Kagoshima, wherever they're going from Kyoto, let's say, they visit Kyushu, but wherever they're traveling, they always comment in their diaries about, that they tried a food of that place, and they really liked the food and stuff. And one thing that actually just occurred to me just as we were talking is I went to a conference recently, and it was a little bit new to me, actually, this, now I've forgotten the word, Seichi Junrei. Seichi Junrei.
Oh, that's the anime pilgrimages,
yes.
right?
So going around, Junrei means like to go around, like to patrol, not patrol, but like, I don't know, Junrei means like go around, and Seichi is
like do a circuit.
Right, to do a circuit of sacred places, Seichi. And anyway, a surprising number of young grad students were giving talks about Seichi Junrei, and in particular about the town of Hida Furukawa in Gifu, which is, as far as I'm aware, completely middle of nowhere place, but the town has taken it upon themselves to say, hey, come to Hida Furukawa and you can see where Kimi no Nawa, where your name takes place. And anyway, what in addition to looking up a list of all the places in Tokyo that you can get the exact photo of like where that staircase is or whatever, which I'm going to do at some point.
I've been there.
But what just occurred to me actually is maybe, this Seichi Junrei stuff, people are going to places that they've seen in anime and they want to see the same place that they saw in the drawings, right? In the animation. People in the Edo period were going to try to find the same places that they saw in the woodblock prints, right?
100%.
And I'm not positive whether any of these places actually line up that you could like hold up a woodblock print and be like, oh yes, it looks exactly the same. I don't think that's going to happen, but nevertheless,
some of them do.
Yeah,
because I've been to quite a few places on the Nakasendo and Tokaido, and when you get to those post towns, I try to find the spot
right
that the painting was made from, and it doesn't perfectly line up, but sometimes it does.
Yeah,
and you can get a photo, and like, look, I recreated this iconic image.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it'd be entertaining to go. I forget which station is which one, but there's from Hiroshige, and I think actually from quite a few like other versions. It's always the same station where the wind is blowing everyone's papers away, and it's always the same station where, I don't know, it's covered in snow and like that. So you try to recreate the famous scene.
Well, as you brought up the pilgrimage to sacred sites with anime, I mean, if you go to Kanda Myojin, so Kanda Shrine here in Tokyo, which is right next to Akihabara. So that's kind of the
right
geek mecca here. I mean, for all of its history, like going back to the 600s, I think is when it was established. It was dedicated to, two mythological gods of good luck, and then they also enshrined Taira no Masakado,
right,
who had this whole uprising here and tried to establish himself as, quote, the emperor in the West, which the real emperor was not having anything to do with. And they put his rebellion down, but he was enshrined there, and he was like a local hero in the Kanto area and in Edo in particular. And there's all these stories about his, head flying back from Kyoto, and it's interred here in Otemachi. You can still see it,
Right.
And that if they didn't upkeep that little shrine, plagues would happen, fires would break out, there'd be a typhoon or something. And to this day, they still keep it in pristine condition, And he's, to my understanding, he's the only samurai who has a bank account. And they use that bank account to maintain the grave and to make offerings at Kandamyojin. But
That's fantastic.
it's an awesome story. Because, it gets better, because the Meiji Emperor, when he moved into Edo Castle, he was like, that guy wants to overthrow the imperial family, so let's de-enshrine him.
Right.
And when MacArthur came over here during the occupation after the war, he was like, oh, there was a guy who was all about overthrowing the emperor? Re-enshrine him.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So they had this whole back and forth. Yeah.
That's wild.
But it gets even better. Well, not better, weirder. There's a famous anime. So there's a famous anime called Love Live. It came out a few years back. So I've never seen this anime, but it's such a household name that I can identify all of the characters when I see their posters and things like that. And it's about, my understanding is it's about a bunch of like high school girls who want to form an idol group. And one of the girls gets a part-time job as a shrine maiden at Kandamyojin.
Okay.
So for the listeners who don't know, the shrine maidens have a very specific type of dress. So they'll wear a white kimono with red hakama, so kind of like a pants sort of thing that goes over that. And when that happened, like overnight, becoming a shrine maiden, which is wasn't a popular part-time job for girls, became like the part-time job that every like high school girl and university girl wanted to have. And that at Kandamyojin in particular, they were actually turning people away. Usually shrines are begging begging girls to be shrine maidens. And if you go there now, there are all these like emma, so the little votive plaques, these little wooden votive plaques that usually have a picture of the shrine or the kami who's enshrined there, or maybe the Chinese zodiac character for the year. There, they have characters from Love Live, or people will bring blank emma, and these wannabe or like aspiring anime or manga artists will draw their own pictures on there.
Wow. I went to Kandamyojin for the first time maybe 2 years ago, and I remember there's like it's not even a cafe. Yeah, I guess there's like a cafe right outside the Tori.
It's
dedicated.
It's called Edoko. The cafe.
There's like an anime cafe. I don't know if it's Love Live or what it is, but there was an anime cafe right outside the gates where you could.
It's not there anymore.
Oh, really? Where you could, get your picture taken with a cardboard standout of the characters, and you could buy drinks that were named after the characters, and I don't know, whatever. So I wonder if that's what this series. I wonder if it was that, or if it was a different series.
It has to be that.
Right.
It's got to be that. It was a bunch of girls, right?
I don't remember actually. Although I don't know if it's really getting away from our tourism conversation, but I also love that Kandamyojin has, I guess because it's so close to Akihabara, has become like the patron shrine for electronics or something. I don't know. I've bought so many omamori, so many like charms to stick on my computer and on my phone to like protect my electronics. Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
Protect my electronics from whatever demons or angry Heian couriers or whatever it may be.
It's a really interesting shrine, and definitely worth the visit. Actually, that cafe that you're talking about is not there anymore. But this spring, On the left-hand side of the shrine, as you walk in past, there's like a statue of Ebisu, and as you're facing the main hall, on the left-hand side is a huge cultural center, and it's called Edoko.
Oh.
But they spell it EDOCCO, and it's like the Edo Cultural Center.
Okay.
Something. And they've got books. They have like places where you can try sake or just sit down and drink tea. They have a huge book collection in Japanese, and then they have lots of books on Shinto in English as well. And in the basement, they do like a rotating series of cultural events, like tea ceremony, or you can have what's the word I'm looking for? Anyways, you can see geisha perform or maiko and things like that for free. So if anyone has ever had an experience with a geisha or maiko, you probably know it ain't cheap. And so to do it for free in a small, intimate setting is kind of cool.
For sure.
But I guess we've gotten kind of on a tangent there. But back to, I guess if we want to go back to pre-modern Japan for a minute, and that's kind of where some of the unique aspects of tourism in Japan, so how it's a little bit different from if you go to Rome or if you go to France or something like that. But we have to, I guess, first start with that concept that there really wasn't an idea of tourism as we think of it pre-1868, because it was very much an agrarian society. And so the majority of Japanese people were kind of stuck to a plot of land, right?
Right.
Just kind of laboring on...
But there was a tradition of pilgrimages, though, right? Did that substitute for tourism?
Well, I mean, we kind of touched on that, but like the average peasant wasn't going anywhere, you know?
Oh, no pilgrimages for the dirty-faced peasants?
Millet grubbing.
Right.
The millet grubbing dirt farmers.
Well, and
I think...
and the samurai had to get official permission. Like I think they weren't really allowed to travel unless they were on official business in some fashion.
That's right.
But in between, I mean, especially towards the second half of the Edo period, you have all these wealthier merchants, wealthier commoners.
Merchants, yeah.
And, I don't know. I sense that you have a direction that you're going in, Marky, so I apologize to distract. But I do think, I mean, people claimed they were going on pilgrimage, or maybe they were being honest, But one thing I've always thought is interesting also is that, along the way of your pilgrimage and on the way back and whatever, it's about, enjoyment and entertainment and stuff. And like I went a couple years ago, or was it last summer? I think last summer I finally went to Ise, and I saw the shrine and whatever. But like right outside, I guess I don't know, a short bus ride away from the shrine is the neighborhood of Furuichi, which I don't think gets a lot of tourists these days, but it doesn't get a lot of tourists these days. But in the Edo period, Furuichi was the third largest pleasure quarters in the archipelago.
Ooh, drinking and whoring.
Yeah, and so people would go to Ise, which is like the most sacred site, and say, oh, we're going on this pilgrimage to go visit Ise Shrine and purify myself and pay respects to the sun goddess and whatever. And then they would get there and engage in drinking and whoring.
Well,
and then purify themselves after.
And then purify themselves after the fact. Exactly. Yes. So
it's funny. It's funny that you kind of went in that direction, because that is a tangent, but it's a good one, and it's interesting. Number one, local people maybe wouldn't be able to travel so far. So if you were a local peasant and you were stuck to the land, they might build a Fujizuka.
Right.
So people would bring stones from Mount Fuji, like volcanic rock and build a little mini Mount Fuji that you could walk up, and that would count because you couldn't actually go to Mount Fuji. But also in front of shrines, you've got the Monzencho, so the town in front of the gates. And if anyone has ever been to Asakusa, and if you go to Sensoji, there's the Nakamise, so that whole long area where they just sell little knickknacks and snacks and things like that. And people are like, this just seems so touristy. But it's always been that way because the pilgrims come there and they need something to eat. They need, also pleasure quarters are going to be there. So there's always cheap prostitutes and places to get food and drinks and drinking and whoring and all that in front of shrines and famous temples.
Right.
And what good is a shrine without a cheap prostitute?
Exactly. Like, there's no point to really going.
Well, I mean, not that I intended to focus on this aspect, but I just remembered, as long as we're talking about it, Amy Stanley's book on selling women, which is actually, it's a really excellent book on the history of prostitution in Edo period Japan. And she talks about the what's the word? The kind of tension between like commercial desires and morality and whatever. In that a lot of port towns and post towns, in slightly more rural areas, they needed to get, tourist is maybe the wrong word, but they needed to get travelers to stay in their town and not in the next town, right? In order that the local merchants, the local innkeepers could make a living. And so, I forget exactly which towns she talks about as her examples. I think it was probably Nakasendo towns that she was talking about. But, whichever town it is, they're going to say, well, of course, as good Confucian moralists, whatever, we don't want prostitution in our town. And the prostitution is distracting all of our young men away from, their work in the town, and it's taking away all of their money. But
keep in mind that I don't think they had a moral problem with it. It was in terms of the women's well-being or anything like that.
Oh, well,
like, sex wasn't a taboo. It was like you said, like distracting the men. Right.
I mean, I don't think sex was taboo, and they weren't really worrying about the women, to be honest, but they were worrying about the moral impact upon the men. And yet, at the same time, there's also a moral imperative on the part of the village headman and whatever to do what he can to help keep the town prosperous. And so Absolutely. A lot of towns did have, more prostitution so that the town could be prosperous, so that travelers would choose to stay there rather than choosing to stay in the next town over. And like I was saying, it supports the innkeepers, it supports the local merchants, it supports the local restaurants. So that's an interesting phenomenon that also, developed at that time. And earlier, absolutely developed, earlier. We have stories of, I'm blanking on the right word, but I don't know, rest houses, tea houses, whatever you want to call them, in the Heian period, in the Muromachi, in the Kamakura Muromachi periods as well. So,
and you kind of took this like a very far off. It's related. It's a.
We can totally come back. I'm sorry.
No. Well, actually, I liked it because it reminded me of one thing. A good anecdote. And if people want to check out the full story, go to JapanThis.com. Actually, better than that, just do a Google search for what does Shinjuku mean.
Oh, yeah.
So Shinjuku literally means new post town. And there were two highways that intersected there. It was completely the boonies. It wasn't even in Edo proper. It was the suburbs. Basically a bunch of rice paddies and a single daimyo palace. And when it was allocated post town status, in order to kind of encourage people to stay there rather than some other place, all of the local shops, pretty much all of them, had prostitution in some capacity. So you need a new pair of shoes for your journey? Why don't you get a prostitute with that, So all of these local businesses are.
Would you like a side of whore with your cheeseburger?
Exactly. So yeah, all of these local merchant families are pimping out their daughters, and it got so out of control. And it's just a short walk from the center of town, right? Shinjuku's not that far of a walk. You can make it there in an hour or 2 hours, depending on where you're located.
Right. Right.
And it was substantially cheaper than the Yoshiwara, which is just famous for being cost prohibitive. You know, if you
Oh my God. Yeah.
yeah, you hear stories of samurai, losing entire, bankrupting themselves essentially in the Yoshiwara, and you couldn't even. Oftentimes, you couldn't get action on the first visit. You'd go to a tea house and kind of interview, and sometimes the courtesans there could actually refuse you. After three meetings or something, they'd just be like, "Yeah, this guy's kind of a chump." But in Shinjuku, nobody was being turned away. It was very affordable and accessible, and it took a hit on Yoshiwara. So the proprietors of Yoshiwara sent whoever their main representative was to the magistrate in Edo and filed a formal complaint. And actually, the shogunate took action and removed Shinjuku's post-town status as a punishment.
Oh.
And Tokugawa Yoshimune, I believe, is kind of famous for being a kind of Confucian hard-ass. He passed a law, like a nationwide law, that said if you've got a restaurant or an inn, you're only allowed to have 2 meshimori onna. So I don't know how to translate that, but basically prostitutes. But it specified, restaurant or inn. So the local shoemaker or kimono shop couldn't have prostitutes anymore. Yeah. But to this day, Shinjuku is like Japan's largest red light district. Yeah, so I always like to say, if you go to Shinjuku to, for drinking and whoring, you're participating in this very traditional activity. But as for this tangent, to kind of bring this back, one of the things that I wanted to get back to was what kind of makes tourism in Japan a little bit unique was, and we hinted at this earlier, was people were traveling to local places and they would enjoy the food, and that these meibutsu, and that this is, even to this day, this is a huge thing. Like every single Shinkansen station that you get off, they're going to have the local delicacy. So if you're in Nagano, they're going to have, Shinshu Ringo or Shinshu Soba. If you go to Hiroshima, you've got the Momiji Manju, so the maple leaf shaped cakes with sweet bean paste in it. So every place has their local thing, and then you're literally expected to bring these things back as omiyage. Right, and so for the listeners who don't speak or read Japanese, omiyage usually translates as souvenir, but it kind of just means locally born or like made locally. And so for the people who couldn't travel, couldn't get those travel passports like in the Edo period, you could bring those things back and kind of live vicariously, if not just through woodblock prints, but also through the tastes of that area.
Right, and that's still a huge thing today. Number one, we have in my office right now, we have just a pile of boxes of omiyage from everywhere that people have been on like business trips or whatever, research trips, and some of them I can't even. Anyway, I don't know. We had some gyunyu senbei, like milk, cow's milk sesame crackers, which I've never heard of before, which are apparently from, what the hell is it called? Anyway.
Akita or Hokkaido?
No, they're from those little tiny islands that are technically part of Tokyo, but are really, really far away.
Oh,
I'm blanking on the name of the islands. But then
Ogasawara.
is it? It might be Ogasawara. But then the other thing, which I would love to visit. It's a crazy place to visit. But then the other thing that I was thinking about is, I don't know how historical this is. I don't know how far it goes back, but right around Tokyo Station, I think if you walk around that neighborhood long enough, you could probably find omiyage shops for all 47 prefectures.
Yeah, like going all the way to like Ginza.
Sort of Ginza, Yaesu, Tokyo Eki kind of neighborhood.
Yeah. They're like prefectural antenna shops.
Right.
Mm.
And you can go hang out with Kumamon and, whatever. But, anyway. I mean, I don't know. We can go on about it forever. But the local thing. I went to I love the local history museums, like everywhere. But I just went to it's not brand new, but sometime within the last like 5 years, I think, they have this new local history museum in Nerimaku, like just a little bit northwest of Ikebukuro. And you go there and they're just like, Nerima Daikon is everything. And like, let us tell you about our local history of Nerima Daikon. Anyway, they actually have really, really good udon at that. They have really good udon at the local history museum.
And then when you're done with that, we have a town that's dedicated to tabi socks that you can check out.
That's right.
Right. And if you want to go all the way to Obama City, you can go get chopsticks because they're famous for their chopsticks in Obama City, rather than promoting anything else about themselves.
What's Trump City famous for?
And then head on down to Nagasaki and pick up some Trump City. Head on down to Nagasaki, pick up some Castello while you're at it. Yeah, Japan really talks a big game when it comes to being eco-friendly, and they do like way above and beyond what we do. But the omiyage, my God, it's like food within plastic, within a box, within a plastic wrapping, within a plastic box, within another box, wrapped in paper.
Well, that's a whole other podcast. Is if we wanted to talk about gift giving in Japan.
Oh yeah.
Because I think that's what is tied to that and why it won't change. Because
right.
If you give something that looks like crap, it's not good. And if you even think about giving gifts to people, like when you visit their house for the first time, and you wrap it up in a furoshiki, like I don't know what to call that in English, but it's like a handkerchief kind of thing. But wrapping up your gift to respect the gift and then to also respect the journey that you take, so you don't rough it up, and then you present it in a very nice thing is also respectful. So yeah, the omiyage are it's kind of wasteful, and I think a little bit annoying to actually have to do that, because again, as far as the culture goes, this is like giri, right? It's a social obligation,
right?
So if I come back from Kyoto, for example, and I don't have yatsuhashi, so like their local kind of traditional Japanese sweets, for some of my friends, luckily I don't work in an office, so I don't have to deal with that. But if you don't come back with that, it's like people resent it. Like you are expected to bring back these omiyage. Why don't if we want to get into some like cool history stuff, that's sort of related here.
Let's do it.
Tourism was, as we know it, was kind of impossible for much of the pre-modern period, but as we alluded to that infrastructure of the highway system and the post towns, once we've got that system in place, people were coming and going quite a bit, especially the merchants and samurai. But compared to now, where you can go anywhere you want, nobody's gonna bat an eye as long as you've got a passport or you're Japanese or whatever. But at that time, it was a very regulated system, and you would have to apply for permission to go. and have a good reason to go. And as you were traveling throughout the country, staying in these post towns, they also had a kind of insurance or guarantor system in place. So if you were a merchant who was often traveling on certain routes, you could get a guarantor who had a professional relationship with certain inns along different routes, or usually a single route, and maybe 2 inns in this place or 2 inns in that place. And when you showed your sort of insurance card to them, they would allow you to stay, because often you didn't, like in the Edo period, you didn't often pay cash. You were kind of good for it, and then you pay later. This still happens with geisha today, for example. Like there's no cash that's going to be exchanged. And this was kind of the same on the post road system. And actually, if you go to Kawasaki, in their history museum, they've got a couple examples of these insurance cards. And basically, the insurance company would vouch for you, and then they'd make the payment, and then you would pay them, presumably on a rotating basis. Like you've got a contract with them.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, actually, that's a really awesome museum. They've also got examples of portable pillows that travelers would go with. So you have a little fold-up, super uncomfortable wooden pillow, like those Edo period pillows.
Right.
That travelers would go around with. But another thing is that I think is really interesting about the post town system is coming into Edo. Coming into Edo, there were multiple highways, but initially the 3 main ones, which I think that system was abolished in the late 1600s, once it was clear that peace had been established and Tokugawa rule was going to stick. But they have the Okido, so it literally means like a big wooden door.
Oh, yeah.
And you can still see the remains of one in Takanawa, Tamachi, here in Tokyo. And these were just kind of checkpoints to make sure armies weren't trying to come in to make a beeline for the castle. And these kind of marked the city limits. And you can still see where, like, they'll have, for the other 2, there were 3 of them in Edo. Only one remains, and it's only one little part of it, but there are still signs marking the other ones. But the other kind of peculiar thing about the system were the sekisho. So the checkpoints where you would actually have to provide that passport that says you have permission. You could be searched.
Right.
And it's quite famous. The women who worked there, they'd usually have 2 women who would check female travelers, because female travelers were considered particularly suspicious, because, them women folk. And it
Well, because obviously they were kunoichi, so
female ninjas. Hashtag I hate ninjas. But that, that ties into that whole concept of iri teppo de onna.
Right.
So keeping weapons from coming in and helping stop fleeing women. So the concept being they didn't want feudal lords bringing weapons into Edo to overthrow the government, and they didn't, during the hostage system that was in place, they didn't want the wives or daughters of the local lords trying to escape. And what they would actually do at these sekisho is they'd have these women who are described as being incredibly unpleasant, would cavity search the women and go through their hair, like checking for secret messages and things like that. Because if you've seen Japanese traditional women's hairstyles at the time. There's a lot of hair going on there, so
Right.
I guess you could
And
sneak a message in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the giant hairstyles, you can hide a lot of stuff in there. But I was actually just reading about that. Well, I mean, even though they had these kind of strict checkpoints and various kinds of methods, right? It seems like people did actually travel a lot. And Amy Stanley, the same scholar who recently wrote about selling women, who wrote about prostitution, is working on a book on traveling women, and she's really following one woman in particular who went all the way to Edo with well, I don't know, anyway, she travels a lot, and she ends up with some men who are not so good for her, and anyway, but the point is she makes it through or around these checkpoints in all kinds of different ways. And one thing I was also reading about somewhere was also that people would go around the checkpoints. They would, make these sort of unofficial other ways around, which came to be known as onnamichi, or women's roads, because that was, men could travel. Interestingly, I don't know if it's interesting. Anyway, interestingly, men could travel more easily than women. Right, you can go in and out of the checkpoints as long as you have some kind of documentation. But the women, I guess, because of the hostage system and because of whatever other kind of connected ideas about them belonging to their husbands or belonging to their fathers or whatever it was, that they shouldn't be traveling, it was much harder to travel as a woman. And so people would just go around the checkpoints in some way on these onnamichi. Yeah.
Well, speaking of like onnamichi, there you can often find like onari kaido. So onari means like the presence of the shogun.
Oh, right.
So if you ever watched any like samurai movies, when the shogun enters the room, there are like, Uesama no onari, and the shogun will walk into the room. Whoa. But like going up to Nikko, right, where Tokugawa Ieyasu and Tokugawa Iemitsu are enshrined, and there's some other very important temples and shrines there. The local daimyo were required to go up there and attend some Buddhist rituals to commemorate the shogun. But the shogun and his entourage wouldn't use that street like some, I don't know, it's not a millet grubbing daimyo, but whatever the equivalent of that is. And so he'd have his own highway. Mm-hmm. So even in Edo, you can find, like, if you go to Zojoji, which is a funerary temple of the shoguns, there's a station there called Onarimon, and there's actually a gate, the Onarimon the Onarimon gate is still there. And so the shogun doesn't go in through the front entrance like a chump. Like, he goes in through the back side door, which would give him direct access to the funerary temples that were there.
Right.
Until the Americans bombed it.
Oh, Gewalt.
And that's it for part one of our discussion on travel and tourism in pre-modern Japan. Stay tuned for part two next month. And be sure to check out patreon.com/samurai archives. I'm always actively putting up content over there. Some of the bonus audio includes conference presentations, lectures, audio cut from the podcast, and behind-the-scenes stuff. So check it out. I'm doing my best to add bonus audio every month, so go take a look. And hey, while you're at it, rate and or review the podcast on whatever platform you use to listen. And lastly, a shout out to Joshua. Thanks for the support. All right, and with that, see you next time.